Thank you. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. David Brose, who is the Chief Curator of Archaeology of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. Dr. Brose, in the first part we talked about that area on the near west side, but you also indicated that you're working in the mall area. Talk a little about that.
This summer, we've been involved with the redevelopment of Mall A, which is going to become a parking garage associated with a new hotel that's going in next to the Society National Building. I'm sure most of your viewers have seen the construction going on down there. Because there are federal funds involved, there have to be surveys to make sure that there are no significant historical properties.
I see.
But there are. And so what we're doing is investigating those archaeological sites that were preserved under the mall itself to recover the kind of information that would tell us a lot about the history of Cleveland.
Now, look, we have some slides of that area, too, and let's take a look at those, and you can describe for us what we're seeing.
Well, you're seeing the excavation of a series of houses that were on the back end of East 3rd Street, Wood Street. This is the corner of the mall right across from the library. You can see the Cleveland Public Library in the left-hand part of the screen, East 3rd going across the screen, and then the Federal Post Office. The street that runs behind where we're working is Rockwell Street. And that thick zone of about 3 feet of soil was laid in when this area was raised, when the houses were knocked down in 1903, and when the public malls that characterized that part of Cleveland were built. This is the foundation of one of the houses that was there at the time. This house was built in 1837. It was a 2-story wooden frame structure on a brick foundation, and there was some rebuilding in the 1840s.
This, too, is an Irish area, essentially. Is that correct?
No, actually, this is one of the more oddly mixed neighborhoods in Cleveland.
Oh, really?
From 1837 through the 1890s, when the area became abandoned. This particular house was actually lived in by an Irish saloon keeper named Thomas Adelson. But many of the other areas were lived in by people of very different social and ethnic backgrounds. Out behind the houses, since this is up till 1880 an area of no city service, there wasn't much, people had privies. This is the privy behind the house at 100 Wood Street. You can see those dark areas around the outside of this rectangle. Those are wooden posts, wooden boards driven in to hold this intact. And through time, this privy filled in with all kinds of material to the level of the ground. Then another one would be dug rather than cleaning these out. So these are the areas that we've begun excavating. You can see we're halfway down into one of these privies. Below the edge of where the deposits were, you can see these dark stains going further down into the ground. Those were the posts that were built to hold this area as an open pit.
I see.
Unfortunately, during one of the weekends when it drizzled and our crew was not working out there, people cut through the wire fence surrounding this project area and began tunneling into the bottoms of the wells and the privies that we had opened up to recover the information.
Did this suffer some serious damage there?
We lost some materials. The people who were digging were primarily looking for complete bottles because there is a market for old bottles. And so everything else that they dug into, they left right where it was. We don't know what bottles entirely were taken because a few of those were shown as we left that Saturday, but that's about all they got. No, I think we've got most of the information.
Good.
Because there was no water, many of
like
these people, this is a cistern. This was designed to catch and hold rainwater. This is a cistern that was at one of these little houses coming off of St. Clair Avenue. The cisterns were lined with a heavy mortar, and this was probably built around 1848 or 1849, and the man who built it mortared it to hold the water, and in leaving this cistern left his footprint in the mortar, and we have a cast of that now.
Very interesting.
So, these are some of the kinds of objects that we recovered from Mall A. Most of the material from the 6 different structures that we excavated is still in the process of being cleaned and cataloged and having little numbers written on it and inventoried. But one of the characteristic artifacts of the 19th century in this part of the country are these clay tobacco pipes. And a number of these were recovered from Mall A. And a greater number of them were recovered from Irishtown on the west bank of the river.
Now, you also brought along a series with us, a series of small pieces here of remnants of some of these.
Well, I did, because some of these clay pipes from Irishtown are quite interesting. These are the stems of these clay pipes.
Okay, now let me hold this up this way against
Okay.
my hand, and maybe that'd be the easy way to see that. Yeah, right.
Right, the stem would be here, and the bowl of the pipe would be up here, and I think most people have seen the caricatures of the Irish smoking these pipes. They did, but so did everybody else. Most of these pipes were made in England, and many of them are stamped "Made in England"
Now,
on the
you know,
stem.
with the animosity that existed between the English and the Irish, isn't it a little surprising that the Cleveland Irish would have used this kind of product?
Well, I think they avoided it when they could. They bought they bought East Ohio pottery to avoid buying pottery made in England, but clay pipes were basically made mostly in England. And even the English were not adverse to stamping their clay pipes with political slogans. This one, if you can see it, is a fragment of the bowl of one of these clay pipes from Irishtown. You can see the shamrock and the harp, and then the words R-U-L-E. This once would have said Home Rule. And during the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s, really up till 1916, the Irish fought for political control of their own company, and this is one of their political slogans.
So it would even be stamped on something very small, something used around the house, or used
Absolutely.
common. There was some very strong feeling
There were
among the
very
Irish,
strong feelings,
to say the
among
least.
Irish, right. Most of these clay pipes that are stamped Home Rule came from the back shed of the property owned by Mary Connolly, the widow who
Ladies
had no man living in her house but who had 3 teenage boys.
One would draw all kinds of conclusions
I
about
think
that,
one
I
would
would
probably
think.
be
You
right.
have some other pieces here as well.
Well, one of the things we're looking for, and much of what we're finding both in Irishtown and in Mall A, are fragments of things like animal bone. These are various pieces of a cow. This is the top end of the hip of a cow. This is a fragment of the shoulder blade of a cow. This is the knuckle of a cow. These are not high-quality cuts of meat. And in fact, anybody who knows anything about butchering can simply sit down and talk about the quality of meat that people are eating by looking at the different cuts of meat that are present. And clearly,
Would they have had cows there in that area? In other words,
No.
would they have had gardens? And
well, they certainly had gardens. We're able to look at some of the areas that were planted and dug up, and we're able to look at the pollen trapped in this earlier ground level, 1840, 50, 60, and actually take a look at the kinds of plants that were being grown. And while the Irish did not have cows running around in their backyard, they certainly had pigs. We're finding a lot of bones and a lot of teeth from pigs. These are the kind of things that you couldn't find at a butcher shop. And we're finding the bone cut in very clumsy ways, suggesting that at Irishtown people were keeping out in their backyards chickens and pigs, and they were butchering and eating them there.
And when you say eating them, then they were, and you also brought along, I know, a piece of pottery here
Right.
as well. And this pottery, I think you said, is the, I guess you'd call it the expensive pottery.
With relatively expensive pottery. This is a piece of English whiteware, the bottom of a plate, and if you turn it over, you'll be able to see the manufacturer's marks stamped into it. This is actually from Clement's Pottery in Tunstall, England. Now, here's another piece that ostensibly looks the same. It's a little bit later. The stamp on the bottom, the painting on the bottom, looks just like the English seal, except this was made in eastern Ohio.
I see.
Because the potters in eastern Ohio knew that most people thought imported English pottery was much fancier.
I see. Even though, in fact, it would have been...
Even though it was cheaper.
Yeah, exactly
Even
my
though it was
point.
cheaper.
Tell me a little about the historical museums, history museums, natural history museums' interest in archaeology.
Well, our interest in archaeology is basically the interest that the entire museum shows in all of its fields. It's a hope that we will be able to understand the natural world and the interactions that humans have with it in order to make some informed choices about how we affect it and how it in turn will affect us. In northern Ohio, of course, there are thousands of years of prehistoric occupation. So most of our energies have in the past and even today been focused on understanding the prehistoric use of this environment.
Are you doing similar kinds of research in other parts of the community, of the Cleveland area?
Historical
Yes.
and prehistoric, yes, throughout northeastern Ohio.
Can people see some of the results of your work someplace?
Most of the prehistoric work we've done is on display at the Museum of Natural History itself. The work which we've recently completed at Irishtown Bend and the work that we will be doing there in the future is now on display at the gallery entrance of City Hall. You can walk right into the middle of Cleveland City Hall and see the artifacts and the maps and some pictures, as well as a brochure that explains what we've been doing at Irishtown.
Now, in the downtown area, however, you have to finish up down there, I would gather, pretty quickly, because they're getting ready to do that building.
That's right. We will be finishing up there by the end of September, and at that point we will have all the information out of the ground so that those who are doing the redevelopment will be able to proceed with it.
Dr. Brose, thank you very much for your interesting and exciting discussion of the Irish in Cleveland, and particularly about the role of archaeology in those kind of discoveries.